I'm the Director of Collections, the Curator of Science and Technology, and also one of the curators for the Polaroid Project exhibition that is now on display at the museum upstairs. I want to welcome you to this series of Polaroid Spotlight Talks. These occur on the second Saturday of the month at 2 o'clock, and this is the fourth program in this series. We opened with a bang with many faces who I now recognize who came for Polaroid Day, a special all-day event that invited people to see the exhibition, to take part in conversations with each other, and to share with the general public and create an art installation here of sorts. So that started us off in November, and we've had talks from historians and artists, and today we feature chemists. So Polaroid is, of course, the name of a company and of a brand, but it is also the name of a medium that can record visible light. And I've been the keeper of the Polaroid Company historical collection for a decade now, and people are fascinated with the cameras and the finished pictures, but many people sort of skip over what I consider the miracle of Polaroid, and that is the chemistry and chemical engineering, mechanical engineering effort to create a wet lab on a small square or sliver of piece of paper, and to create a finished image in roughly a minute or two. So today we're going to rectify that, and we have three chemists who are going to tell three stories from a half century of history. They cannot possibly tell every story, although I think they may want to try, from at least their own careers. So at fixed intervals, I'll be rude and cut the book, and
please do.
And let the next person come up. But there are many people in the audience today who also were part of this multi-year adventure to create a myriad of films and cameras and products. And I know you will want to have your say, and I'm sure you'll call out these guys when they don't get the details exactly as you remember it. But I'm going to use the disclaimer used by the famous public radio show The Law, which says all stories told here are true as remembered by the speaker. So there we have it. I want to tell you our three speakers are Gerry Gomes, Paul Nangeroni, and Ted McClelland. Gerry is today a senior scientist at ChemLab, but he worked for Polaroid for 22 years or so, between 1986 and 2008. These guys they all were very careful to tell me, well, I do applied chemistry or applied products. Like, okay, I got it. You're not, the weirdos in MIT lab that are, doing this hypothetical research. So we got it. But they are definitely applying chemistry and chemical engineering and physics and every other engineering and science discipline you can imagine to make an extraordinary array of products. But make no mistake, Polaroid was a very, very unusual company. It's in the mid-20th century, the United States was home to a number of institutions that had exceptional R&D labs. It's the golden age of corporate R&D. So you had DuPont, you had General Electric, you had Bell Telephone Laboratories, and Polaroid was part of that extraordinary array of companies that built the modern world, that invented the modern world. It was a way of being that has disappeared and doing research. You really cannot find an American corporation today that looks anything inside like what those companies did. But even among that elite group I just listed off, you know, IBMs and Bell Labs, even among that elite group, Polaroid, they were like the hippies of this group. They were bold and brash, they took some risks, they had, you had a founder and CEO in Edwin Land who was exceptional in encouraging people to think outside the box. And so you will hear that in our speakers, and I know there's at least one artist among us today, but there may be more who had the opportunity to do something with this company, which was that they got to help shape the corporate strategy of Polaroid. There is not another American company that turned to artists to help define the key aspects of its corporate strategy. And that's the quality that we try to draw out in this exhibition, not just an exceptional assemblage of photographs, but also an exceptional assemblage of artifacts that document creativity on either side of the shutter button. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gerry, who's going to start us off. He's going to share a story about a particular defect in the film. This was a product that needed to work perfectly. If you think about this, you know, whether you had at the beach or in the winter or, you know, the film, you really wanted it to come out perfectly every time. And if it didn't work, like pretty much 99.9% of the time, you know, nobody was going to buy that product after a while, because it was expensive in comparison to other photographic media. So, Gerry, get us started and tell us about the things that go bump in the film.
Great. Thank you so much. It's actually really an honor and privilege to be here and in some small way talk about Polaroid, the work that we did. I'm thankful for everyone for coming. I'd like to acknowledge our leader, Eric Ferguson is here. We worked in W4 all those years. Eric was my technical leader. Really was a great example of the type of management we had to support and excellent. So I was at Polaroid from '86 to 2008, mostly on the applied chemistry side, and I thought, well, let's talk about what we did at W4. A lot of it was technical problem solving, so I'm going to use that as a case in point. I'd like to just verbally say a quote from Dr. Land was, if you're able to state a problem, it can be solved. All right, so immediately when you state the problem in a clear, succinct way, your brain starts going to the kind of work and experiments, how to fix it, and what you know and what you don't know. So we're going to go to our problem statement. Next slide. Okay, so you know, with these beautiful Polaroid pictures, we also want them to come out beautiful and not change as a function of time. So what was happening, this was in the 97, 98 type of time period, as the picture sat around and aged and dried out, it was actually developing like a braille-like bumpy texture to it. Presumably there was something happening underneath the surface, the crystals growing, but you know, we're going to get to that in a minute. But you know, that was a big issue. It was also coincident. A lot of times when something like that happened at Polaroid, as my colleagues all know, if you look at the timing, often it would be, okay, that defect was coincidence with the introduction of this change. So there was a big clue right there. If you think of this as a mystery puzzle you're trying to solve, that was a pretty big clue. We had changed the neutralizing layer from a solid layer to an aqueous layer. Okay, but now, problem. Let's talk about like taking pictures. So, I mean, here's just your random guy taking pictures, right? Mr. Warhol, right? So what happens when you take a picture? Next slide. Okay, so this is the chemistry. So inside the camera is a film cassette. There are 10 frames. Every cassette has a battery, has the power to film in the camera. If you were to cut that frame open, you would see a light-sensitive emulsion called the negative. You'd see a clear sheet, receiving sheet called a positive, a negative positive, and then there was this sealed pod at the bottom of the frame, and that contained all the chemistry, all the development chemistry, not all the. When you snapped the picture, you can see a little bit of a set of rollers underneath the cassette. The frame ejected out, the rollers ruptured the pod, and the development chemistry started. And here's the famous Polaroid film stack. So if you did a cross-sectional view of the negative, you would see, depending on the structure, there were up to 15 to 18 coded layers, individually separate coded layers, all coded simultaneously, cascade coding, and in the production area on a 5-foot-long web. 15, 18 layers coded simultaneously in gelatin and base fluids. Of course, what we're trying to accomplish is to record the scene and then reproduce it. So there are 3 separate light-sensitive emulsions that are there, a red, green, and blue sensitive emulsion, and those respectively control the release of the cyan, magenta, and yellow dye. So just a couple of quick examples. If you took a picture in a dark scene, basically no exposure, the signal is sent to flood over all the dyes. So if you flood over these cyan, magenta, yellow dye, you make a nice black color, okay? Likewise, the other extreme, a white light exposure, which actually contains red, green, and blue light, right? The individual component wavelengths. You're exposing all 3 emulsions, and the signal was actually sent not to release a dye. So how do you make the white color then? Well, that chemistry is in the pod. The processing pod contains about 15 chemicals itself, silver solvents or strainers, purines, pyrimidines, uracils, but it also contains about 42% titanium dioxide. So that would give you, in the absence of dye, your what we call the Polaroid, your G-min came from the titanium dioxide. So I want to also, that's directly related to the problem at hand, when you take that picture, it's all, the development has to happen at high pH in order to get it done in that 60-second time period. But also, how do you protect that image from light? So normally when you take, you're normally in the dark room, right? Developing film, you're completely dark, you have a red safe light, you're protecting that emulsion from further fogging action. In this case, we had to provide all that chemistry. So inside the reagent components, there were what we call opacifying or indicator dyes. They were pH-sensitive dyes, and at high pH, they were highly colored and opaque. That optical densities up to 7 and 8. That means from a transmission point of view, only 0.0000001% of the light was getting through to that film unit while it was being developed. If any more light than that, like 1 times 10 to the minus 7, if any more light than that reached the film unit while it was developing, it would fog. You'd see yellow, greenish fog streaks. So, okay, so then there's one last, you're immediately left with another problem. You know, that's all whiz bang, that's great, but then how do you get rid of that? The customer doesn't want to see the opacifying dye. So the mechanism there is a pH drop mechanism. Initially, you do the development first at high pH. It's efficient, fast. You have the opacifying dyes blocking the light. They're ionized, they're in the anionic form, they're charged up, the optical density of 8. Now you want to get them out of there. So you start to drop the pH. And that is done with the acid neutralizing layer. However, you don't want to do that instantaneously, right? You want to have that minute at high pH. So how do you hold that acid back? You have another invention, a timing layer. So you have what was called kind of a hold release timing layer. You'd have that high pH or so for the first minute. You would hold up the acid with that what was called the timing layer, the active hydrolysis of the active ester of the timing layer, and then hold release, it would let go, and the acid would kick in and would start neutralizing the whole system down. Now, one important thing, you always see this in the Vivian Waldorf books and all this stuff, you always see the scheme. The one interesting thing there was that in this version, you see that the acid polymer layer is up top, right? Well, it turns out, Dr. Lang, almost as soon as they produced this film, they realized that polymer layer is also what we might call that Polaroid, a parking layer. So when you have these partially neutralized compounds, you have excess of compounds that haven't been totally exhausted or used up. They tend to wind up being parked in that acid layer. Well, why is that a big deal? Well, a lot of them form color. The quaternary compounds, the purines, the pyrimidines, when they see the alkali stuff, they can wind up having kind of a yellow oxidized kind of grunge look. So in this variation, you were looking through that acid layer. So pretty quickly on in the process, Land, I think it was Paul, I think it was your brother Robert that told me, Land made the decision pretty quickly to put that acid and polymer neutralizing layer in that timing layer at the bottom of the stack, not the top of the stack, okay? So, all right, so let's get back to our problem. Okay, so when you get a problem like that, things that go bump in the picture, what do you do? I think I had been at Polaroid for maybe about 8 or 10 years at that point. But W4 was a place of great institutional knowledge. Almost everyone in Waltham had been involved with product development and had seen a lot of issues, related, not related. So it was a great collaborative environment. I did want to specifically mention Lloyd Taylor, who was back at that time consulting. I mean, Lloyd, if Polaroid in Waltham was like a version of the Red Sox, then Lloyd was like Yaz or Ted Williams. I'll put it that way. I mean, you would go. I think it was Mike Filosa that said, Lloyd is, we have knowledge, but Lloyd is the fountain of all knowledge. Lloyd, I think, is prominently featured in Mr. McElhaney's book, on Assisting on the Impossible. He was an inventor of the temperature inverting interlayer and many other holder of over 50 patents at Polaroid. Okay, so we set up a cross-functional team. We knew that those defects were usually associated with something in the reagent. So we had a pretty big clue to start. Next slide. Okay, so you formulate, like all scientists, you formulate a hypothesis. You get a working hypothesis. Do the facts support your working hypothesis? So we knew that a lot of those chemicals, we're going to show some structures in a little while, they like to be in high pH when we made the reagent, but really the truth was a lot of these purines and pyrimidines and things, when the pH dropped down in the system, that was not a great environment for them. They were a lot less soluble. So we theorized that, the solubility goes down, they crash out, salt out, crash out. They're prone to the theory was what we call hydrogen bonding and associative stacking of the crystals. And essentially, we were growing these things. Now, this last part, I had worked in an analytical group for 4 or 5 years myself, so I always had a tendency, let's go to analytical, let's get some data, let's get something, let's see if we can get, obviously, a positive identification. Pat Hart, as long as you remember, Pat Hart was there for so many years. I remember getting, I dropped off a lot of samples from Pat. I remember getting a phone message on my machine. Hey, kiddo, you're growing potatoes in the alcove, you know? Essentially that's what was happening. These crystals were crashing out and growing. We went into Cambridge. Here's our little like CSI moment. We actually peeled apart dried pictures in frames methodically with a magnifier, picked out individual crystals. Crystal. Took several hours with technicians and everything, picking out enough crystals so we could go into Cambridge, see Gerry Dubek and run atomic mass spectroscopy and get a positive ID. Well, we got 131 mass units corresponded exactly with hypoxanthine, product code DA25, also AKA, also known as 6-hydroxypurine. All right, next step. So then how do you solve the problem? We had our crime suspect, right? We had a pretty good ID. So how do we get rid of it? Well, Lloyd and I don't know if some of you folks might know John Warner, who was there, who went on to form the Warner Babcock Green Chemistry Institute after. Lloyd and John were kind of experts at complexing chemicals. So we said, looks like everything's growing in that alcove. Can we put a complexing agent right in there and stop them from growing to start? So stop them right from the beginning. Well, we had these long chain EO-PO type things, ethoxylated long chain molecules, but not a lot of success in that approach. So we said, okay, we're going to fix it in the reagent. We're going to change the chemistry in the reagent to fix the problem. So I'm not a crystallographer. I don't, this is really not my main area, but you learn pretty quickly. You talk to people, and really the idea was if you could have many small crystals, mixed crystals, then that's the way to get around the problem. As long as the size of the crystal is small enough so that it's not poking up into the receiving sheet, then everyone's, then you can live with that. So we found a couple compounds that, for example, there were also purines, guanine and xanthine, that those were effective if we mixed them in at a certain ratio. However, those were very active restrainers and silver solvents, so it's almost like the medicine, the bad medicine had these deleterious side effects. So that we had to abandon that approach. Next slide, please. Okay, so ideally, what we went after was adding compounds that would both make mixed co-crystals and also not cause these deleterious bad sensometric side effects. So in other words, if you added in xanthine, it worked, but you gave up 10 log units of speed. If you added in guanine, it worked, but the blue D-min sensitometry went up, 2 units, so the picture looked bad, looked yellow and scummy. So we reasoned that if we put sterically hindered compounds in with similar chemistry and structure to hypoxanthine, that might work. 2 good candidates emerged from that work. Not 6-hydroxypurine, but 6-methoxypurine, and inosine, which has a ribose sugar functionality. So next slide, we'll look at structures.
Jerry, you got 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay, great. 3 minutes, thank you. If elected in 2020, no, that's okay. Here are some of our purines, our bad guys, adenine, hypoxanthine, the bad one in question. Adenine, hypoxanthine, guanine, xanthine. On the right, this is a little bit of acknowledgement to Lloyd, although we said if you want to understand all the chemistry, you should understand that these compounds could have tautomers that rearrange, and they go from the keto between the enol form. That's just the indication of that. The keto form is the more standard, stabilized form. So anyway, the two candidates down here, hypoxanthine molecule in the 6th position, instead of a keto or enol, you have a methoxy group. So it's sterically hindered at that site. And then the other approach was in the 9th position, instead of a hydrogen, there you have a ribose sugar functionality. So these both were effective approaches. Just a quick comment on inosine. It's an interesting compound. It's involved in biochemical pathways where purines and purine nucleosides are converted to uric acid. It's been looked at as a treatment for Parkinson's and MS. It's taken sometimes as an athletic performance enhancing drug. You can buy it at GNC for, I don't know, like $10 for 100 pills. And it's an interesting Wikipedia read. And it's also a general chemistry nomenclature. It's called a purine nucleoside. These type of compounds also exist for like guanine and adenine. There are other nucleosides like that. Next slide, please. So which one to pick? Well, it was a pretty easy decision. 6-methoxy was basically a specialty chemical. Now you got to remember, Polaroid was a $2 billion chemical, $2 billion company. We were selling about like 120 million of these film packs. So at the time, so if you said I'm going to put something in that's $300 a kilo, I think Eric would have escorted me to the door at the end of the day, right? Something like $1 a kilo was much more attractive, of $5 a kilo, right? So inosine was commercially available, multiple vendors. It was cheap, easy to source. Also, the cool thing about that compound was with the ribose sugar functionality, it was actually soluble at all those different pHs, right? It was aqueous, soluble at high pH, soluble at low pH. It was a cool compound. And it was compatible, especially compatible with that new aqueous neutralizing layer. I did want to mention, though, at the time, it was a major corporate initiative to get away from that solvent layer. Solvents are bad, right? They're bad for the environment. Polaroid was an environmentally conscious company. I mean, they cared what people thought, and they also, not to sound preachy, they wanted to do the right thing. So this was kind of like a win-win. We're getting rid of these bumps, and we're enabling the scale up of the aqueous neutralizing acid. I think, let's see, what's next? Okay. But imagine, this was important as well. Imagine if you go to the doctor to get your strep test, and they say, okay, thank you very much, I'll have the results for you in 4 or 5 weeks, right? Not good, right? So when we were doing all these experiments, we said, wait a minute, I'm processing my new inosine pod, I'm not really gonna get the results because the whole frame has to dry out in order for the bumping and the crystallization to happen. So I reasoned that maybe we don't need all those silver layers and everything to turn on the defect. We have what we call in W4 dummy negative. So if we take this clear base, coat just the L coat, just the aqueous L coat. 1 minute. Just coat just the aqueous L coat without all those silver layers. Process that at thin gap, in other words, lower spread weight than the higher standard spread weight. I bet we could dry that thing out and get our answer within like a week. Maybe because I'm saying this now, all the hindsight of 2020. Well, it was great. It was an accelerated test, and it was predictive. So that allowed us to do all our ratio work and get the answer in a week. instead of 4 or 5 weeks. Okay, last slide, I think. I won't really spend any time on this, but this is what, you know, we call the no job is over or done until the paperwork is done, right? This is all the qualification work. Well, let's make sure we're not screwing up 5 other things when we put this one thing in, right? So these are the kind of things we did: sensitometry, H&D curves, which is just a function of exposure versus density. Make sure the curves are good, parallel, we're not screwing up the sensitometry. Make sure that the inosine doesn't dissolve in the alkali, disappear on us. Check out multiple vendors and do our photos. And we filed a patent, which was nice. So thank you very much for your time.
Sense of how you might approach one problem, but now multiply that across everything else that's going on in the company at the same time. And you have a sense of an elaborate choreography because people are worried about optics, people are worried about the camera structures, people are getting feedback from testers and users. There's financial issues, there's patent and legal issues, there's, you know, the outside world that's going on at the same time. So it's a very complicated environment here. And so we're going to have a second talk because Polaroid could walk and chew gum at the same time. Ted McClelland is gonna go next. Ted started working at Polaroid in 1961. And he continued there till the company went bankrupt, but he's still active in Polaroid chemistry to this day because he works with our good friend, artist, technician, studio manager, extraordinaire John Reuter, who is right here in the front row. And John runs the 20 by 24 studio. He did it at Polaroid. He owns 2 of the cameras now. And they make the chemicals that enable artists to continue to use this film. And Ted actually makes the chemicals, or leads that process. And this is an opportunity to announce to you that you will have an opportunity on Saturday, April 25th, to actually see the 20 by 24 in operation. So we're going to set up a big event. We'll notify this group. If you're not on our Polaroid Project Friends mailing list, that's the simple email list for this project, I'm going to pass around this clipboard. Sign up because we'll send you all the details of that really special event. If you're already on the list, you need to do so again. But Ted was Ted was I'm being given the hook myself. So I'm going to shut up and let Ted get started. But in any case, he went literally from being hired as a temp to the senior engineer at the company. He has seen it all from operating the machines and to doing some of the chemistry. And so without further ado, Ted, please, here you are.
See, I was not the senior engineer of the company. I was a
You are now.
I just promoted him.
No, now I'm much higher. I'm director of research.
Right.
But Ted,
Speak up, Ted.
You want to hold this? I'll tell you what. Here you go.
We need to
we
see
can't
him.
see him over
Okay.
here. That was here. I wanted, some cover.
You know you like to hide, but you know.
What's the cord on the computer?
We have a lot
Swinton?
So bring that mic close to your mouth.
Feel like a rock star. Let's see, as you said, I began in the company in 1961 as a temp job in optics, packing and shipping sunglasses up the street here. That industry. It only lasted about a month, and in '62, I was hired in film manufacturing. Polaroid was starting up a new line of roll film, type 38 roll film, which is a small version of the one that was already out, and along with 4x5 phones. I stayed there for about 2 years, and then they were scaling up. Because of the scaling up, they fixed all of the machines, made production much more productive. And I got laid off from that job and was asked by personnel to bid on some jobs that were on the board. I bid on a job in research at Osborne Street working for Howard Rogers at the time. Fortunately for me, I got the job. I was in the vice president of research. And that was the beginning of my career, bumpy as it was. So, in this role, I got to make reagents, I got to coat negatives, I got to coat sheets, I got to formulate solutions, bring them to 600 Main Street, get everything coated, get everything potted, and take it back to the color lab and evaluate it for its photographic qualities. I did all of that until '86. During that time, I learned an awful lot. I mean, all of the things that Jerry just talked about were not among them. It was beyond us. We were not chemists. We were really good technicians who had been doing this for years to figure out the photographic systems. We evaluated things for physical appearance and stability, sensitometric parameters, photographic performance, PTL latitude, and assembly performance. And then we took it to assembly and did the same evaluations all over again as they were building the film from the prototypes. From '87 until the company closed its manufacturing operations in '89, I was a team member of the Worldwide Release Organization. Now, that doesn't sound like much to people who don't have a Polaroid history, but that entailed a lot of things. We were responsible for the quality of the film for Enschede, for Mexico, for the Veil, for W2, for all of those films, all of those factories. And we had responsibility. We sent over usually a prepackaged release, in other words, use reagent A with negative B and sheet C, and you'll get a good product. And that took a lot of work to get to A, B, and C, but that's what we did for many years. In '87, when we started winding down things, it just kept getting tougher and tougher. Chemistry was getting old, the negatives were getting old. So we had to continually reformulate and recheck things to keep it going. So then in 2009 when it closed down. I thought it was all done, and that would be it for Polaroid for me. And this guy here, John Brewer, came along and said, "I have a job for you." So it was the ultimate release engineer's job. We have this pile of stuff in the freezer at New Bedford, and they want to sell it. And can we make a product out of it? So, with help from many Polaroid friends, we were able to make the first high-quality 20 by 24 color film system after Polaroid. Now, this pile of stuff was bought in 2009. This is 2020. We're still working from that same pile of stuff. And it constantly moves. It's moving faster and faster. So the reaction time to keep the quality of this film up is faster and faster. So that's, what I do. It's hard, right now, it's hard to purchase chemicals that go into the reagent to fix the sensitometry of the film. So of course, we search for new chemicals, companies that make the old chemicals. Hard to do. So we are the last of Polaroid in the United States. There's film companies, and NSA, not using Polaroid systems. They've developed their own negative, their own sheets, and their own reagents. And this one is it's nowhere close to what Polaroid does. So, having done that, we had a lot of help. I'd just like to mention some names. There's a lot of Polaroid people here. Who know these names. The first two names that come up were Al Clark and Rob Young. Now, Rob found all the equipment. He was in charge of selling off all the Polaroid assembly machines and other equipment. Al Clark, I worked with Al in research, brilliant engineer. He was able to piece all the machinery together and the film systems together to get us going. Gerry, of course, was a release engineer, the golden release engineer. Paul Nangeroni was the release engineer for all of the black and white products that we had. Then we had two people, one person out of 600 Main test reagent, John Boudreau, who helped us, taught us how to run the reactors. And an assembly person, Mark Stuffer, who showed us how to make 25-inch parts.
Don't forget Tom Silver.
Tom Silver out of assembly as well. All of these guys worked as consultants with us to get through the startup. Continue to assist us as we needed. This is a pod machine that we purchased from Polaroid.
Tell you what, why don't you hold this? Okay.
This is a pod machine. All the people that Polaroid know it, they look like nobody else knows. So what happens is these two reels on the foil for the pod, and they feed down into the machine, and reagent and behind the machine is pumped through the pumps and into the pods and sealed off. And that would be okay if we're using pods this big, but we're using pods this big. So it's kind of a difficult process.
It's tested in W3. Same machine.
Same machine. That's the room is clean and
Doesn't look like that.
doesn't look like that anymore. It's like blonde and these are just the racks of raw sheet that we have in storage. This is another interesting machine. This is the negative spooler that we use to take the big rolls of negative, spool them down into product size rolls of negative. I think at one time it was a rug making machine, but sure that's the way it's been adapted by the model shop. They work as a spool. This is me. You can see me. This is the group that we started up with. Myself, John Boudreau, Rob Young, Tom Silva, and Joe Miller. These are great old pictures of the old machines. But Joe made the reagent for us for just about a year before I could manage this machine myself. John had been doing this for many, many years. This is the final reagent coming out of the reactor into the cocaine pots that we bought from. This is the reactor running, pretty complex. That's what a shop looks like now, nothing like a Polaroid shop. Polaroid was always nice, neat, clean, painted, floors were washed every day, you know, not now. Wastewater is in the big plastic bucket on the end. And we have to dispose of that. We have to truck it off, pay it after it's done, and do that at Polaroid. We reclaim the ourselves. Just a scale of the weighing benches. The control panel for the reactor. Still a lot of fun, but this day is going to be backbreaking. And this Chuck Close, the feast. I'm not sure who else to.
That's Robert De Niro.
Robert De Niro.
An unknown actor.
Go sit there.
Just your average day.
Just an average day. All right, that's it.
You want to show here's the last,
Oh, yeah. This is an interesting system being developed in Europe. And it's a single-use 4x5 pack. It's a pack. And they are just about ready to go to market with this. We've been supplying them the film and the reagent sheet to make this. It's been like a year process. So they're about ready to go. If they go too fast, everything will be gone. That'll be the end of the road. So we have to be careful how we handle it. We didn't go through our stuff as fast as we thought we would, but and the only problem that we've run into, the photographic aging of the negative in the sheet. The negative is getting hard, the sheet is getting hard, and it takes us more and more alkali to get the permeability to develop and solubilize the dyes, to get everything across the film image. So that's the biggest problem we have. That's a little problem compared to some of those which they have in Polaroid. Tweaking the reagent, you can always get it back. So, yeah.
I don't know if there's anyone in the audience right now, when he uses the term pod, on the small film, that's this portion right here on the bottom, and that's filled up with these chemicals, which then when you press the shutter button, get ejected and smeared by passing through two rollers across that layer cake that Jerry was showing you in his first slide, and triggers all of those chemical reactions. So it's the source of all the magic. Nothing happens until the film passes through those rollers, and the chemicals, the small amount of wet chemicals, activate all of the chemical reactions. So, Paul, it's your turn, and you're going to take us from the color world back to the black and white world.
Right. Hello, let's see, Paul Nangeroni, worked 40 years in the company. First 20 were just a couple blocks from here over 2 Osborne Street. And we started by working on Polavision, which was the active color product, which is also a black and white product, because that's how it works. We have very good filters, we have black and white emulsion behind it. I have some filters here later if you want us to look through them and see how it reacts with the colors. But I worked on Polavision, worked on all the 35mm instant products, whether it be Polcan, Polachrome, Polograph, Polar Blue, Polar Laclip. But I learned how to do simple experiments, and it's funny, Jerry mentioned the scientific method. And one of the things I was taught was to be skeptical of what people tell you, oh, this is the cause, or you know, it can't possibly be that. Well, go look there first, because they haven't. And also in the scientific method, you come up with a hypothesis. You're not supposed to test to prove, you're supposed to test to disprove. If you can't disprove your hypothesis, then it tends that it might be right. What would happen a lot of times is people would only test to prove, and they would ignore any of the data that said, no, you're on the wrong path. So I was taught to be skeptical, I was taught to use analogies, and an idea about being skeptical was on Polachrome, which was the instant 35mm slide product. We also had crystals, and they've gone over to Jerry Trudek to mass spectrometry, however you pronounce that. And not a chemist, mechanical engineer. Thank God I didn't do any of that. But anyway, it came back that the molecular weight of the crystal was 126. Well, as usual, they blame the reagent, and there's a compounded reagent, which we had several in there that measured 127 molecular weight. And so, the first experiment I did was repeat it. Do I get crystals with the goo? Yeah, I get crystals. Second experiment I did was take the 127 molecular weight product out of the pot. I still get crystals. So then I took all the ingredients out of the pot except for water and the thickener. I still get crystals. I don't know if they were the same crystals, but I still get crystals. So then I said, how can I process this film without using any reagent at all? Well, if you take the film, you take a piece of Scotch tape, you could peel off all the layers that used to get stripped off by the processing fluid, and when you processed it. And I still get crystals. Lo and behold, I went over to the mass spec guy, and I said, here's what I've done. It's not the reagent. It's coming from somewhere else. Well, lo and behold, in the film, they were coating the UV absorber that happened to be called Tinguid 126. Guess what the 126 is? That's the molecular weight. That's the number they got for the crystal. And so it wasn't in the reagent field they had to go and change the UV absorber in the film to a different compound to get rid of the salt. But, you know, there was the skepticism there of, you know, oh, it's this, we know it's coming. And we could have spent a ton of time trying to replace that chemical, and that wasn't it, so that problem went away real fast. As far as analogies, in working on pole vision, we had, that's a gravity feed system for the reagent. You don't break a block, peel it, and it flows down into a nozzle where it gets coated onto the film. And we were having a problem called runout, where we ran out of goo, and it didn't make it to the end of the film. So, my boss, who was pretty sure at the time, said, gee, to the engineering, how much goo you're putting in the pot? And they said, well, we're putting 1.1 grams. Well, the coverage to go on the film is 1.1 grams. You know, you don't have any extra. Well, yeah, but that's enough. He said, well, do you do the dishes at home? Do you wash your dishes? Oh, yeah, of course we wash our dishes. She said, why? Why don't you just hold them up and let everything fall off? Okay. So some material was staying behind in the pot, and that, you know, they hadn't accounted for that. We needed to put that in so that you had enough to make it to the end. And then what happened was, well, now you might have a little too much, and now you got excess that can drip out afterwards. So they had to put in a little time release sponge like the kids use in the bathtubs and stuff that would blow up into the animals that would suck up the excess reagent. Okay, so that's two little examples of that. And one other thing, once when they had pods being produced, they again blamed it on a chemical change in the pod. And the analogy I used was, when you go to the supermarket, you buy a gallon of milk in a carton and it leaks, you don't go yell at the cow, what did you eat? Okay, so, they didn't like that analogy, but the problem wasn't the reagent. So then, after the 20 years in Waltham, in Cambridge, I moved to Waltham, and yeah, I'm gonna need some help on this. And they started going to a weekly meeting in assembly, and they were having multiple issues with people. I went to work on black and white, peel back, coatless film, the small format, and the stuff like this. And so they were having a model. The model is, if you're photographing like a gray or a nice uniform image, you get blotches. It's a little non-uniform. They didn't like that. And their assumption was that the only way to fix that was to change the gap. Right? Now, the film is processed at basically 26 10,000ths of an inch. It's how thick the glue layer is that's spread out. And they would bump that up and down by how big the rails they put on the film. And having come from doing a lot of reagent research, I said, that's not the only way to fix model. There's the whole chemistry of the pod. So I designed an experiment that I knew was going to be extreme. It was going to definitely show that there were other ways to modify the image. And it was very enlightening in that respect. So it was a K8, which is a design experiment. The computer tells you how to lay it out, you pick the factors. So there's 14, 15 ingredients in the pod. I lumped 4 factors, so I added all the toners and restrainers, of which there were 6, made that one factor, treated them all together, and either used 50% less or 50% more. Same thing for the primary developer, which was E27, or hydroxyapatite beam. Did the same for there's a additive silver solvent. It's not the bulk silver solvent, but it's primarily in there for tone, it's potassium thiosulfate. And also the things I called inerts. Inerts were a little bit of zinc oxide, which is in there to stabilize some of the silver. There's a little bit of wetting agent to help disperse that zinc oxide. And there's a little bit of titanium to stop light getting through the edge of the sandwich or pull it out into the sunlight. Okay, so you have the experiment, and I put that one over there, and this one over here. And so, what you,
We're gonna get closer.
so what this is a exposure to a light gray, a medium gray, and a dark gray, and a sensitometric spread. And what you have is the first column, I believe, is all the factors at half X. The next one has the toners and restrainers at 50% more, everything else at half X, all the other factors. And then I forget the next one, I think is inerts and such. But when you get all said and done, you find out that the toners and restrainers can basically shut down the whole image. They can stop cold. We lumped them together as toners, restrainers, and antifloggants. It all depended on the chemist that brought over as to which feature it might do the most. It can stop development, it can stop transfer, it can change how the silver deposits on the positive sheet. And anyway, because assembly said the gap was the only thing that influenced the model, if you bring that back here and you flip it over, or flip this back down, I turned it into a case 16 where I then process all these same spreads again, but at minus 8 gap, which instead of 26 10,000s was 18 10,000s, so roughly 30% less reagent. Hold on one second. And this was another experiment that upset a lot of people because. Yeah, that way. So anyway, what you find is that with the gap, you could improve, or in some cases the image improved, some cases the image stayed the same, some cases the image got a little bit better. But when you did the analysis via the computer, it said the gap was only like 3%. The toners and restrainers were 75%. The B10 was somewhere in 2015s or 20s, and the E47 was in there as well. Well, this was an awakening to the assembly folks because they're there. We didn't know this, and I got asked, how come assembly thinks that the gap is the only way to change the performance of the film? I said, well, most of the people that developed the product are gone, and assembly is left with they've been handed the sheet, they've been handed the reagent. The only thing they have left to change is the gap. And over time, it became that is the only thing that affects the model, is the gap. And it's not the case. Well, what this allowed me to do was over the years, make a lot of changes to the black and white reagent, which we went from having 6 toners and restrainers to only having 4. The other 2 that were removed were ended up being used in the sepia product because they actually, the tone, yeah, they make it go warm, they make it go cool, and we wanted a nice cool black and white as opposed to a warm black and white towards the sepia side. It allowed us to change the processing temperature latitude. There were changes that allowed us to influence the salts, which was by changing the ratios of the 3 aerosols that were used in the pot. But all of this led to waking people up to the fact that you're allowed to, there's a lot we can do with the film reagent chemistry to modify the products and make it more stable over years. Okay? All right. Just, I brought this is a little film clip. This is how you would take a pack apart if you wanted to change the parts on a production pack. You just take this little gadget, stick it in there, you stick it in, and it allows you now to disassemble the pack, but keep the negative light type so that you can change the part, you can change the positive sheet if you needed to, and you can do a number of experiments that way in format, which is a very nice little gadget to have. And so I know we're getting a lot of time, and I think that's about it.
Well, I want to thank Gerry, Paul, and Ted. I know the 3 of them are happy to take questions from any of you now. Those of you that want to get on with your museum visit, you're not held captive. But those of you that are in love with chemistry and Polaroid chemistry and want to ask more details, you're most welcome to come up. I do want to say thank you to all three who have, I think, given you a feel for the technical side of the chemistry of this. So even if you don't know all of those terms, I hope you have an appreciation of the extraordinary effort that went into solving those problems that made the film possible. The color, the contrast, the quality of that film, and you can see the results upstairs in the gallery. There are about 116 images on display. This round, we call it part one of our Polaroid exhibition, will be up until February 23rd. The exhibit will close for 2 weeks, and then we're going to add another 115 or 16 images for part two that reopens Monday, March the 9th. So you are invited, and I hope you'll come back to see the second half of the exhibition. On March the 14th, Betsy Connors, who is both an artist and a holographer, and who worked for Polaroid and then for the MIT Media Lab, will be talking about Polaroid's work in 3D imaging and in holography. We have sessions in April, and again April 25th, we will do a 20 by 24 demonstration. We'll send you notices about that, but those of you that have questions for these guys, and Paul has one more comment, he tells me, so you get the last word.
Talking about funny things that would happen, when we did the shareholders meeting showing television, which 4,400 people saw, got to try the camera for 8 seconds each, we were all instructed not to project, or not to play the cassette a second time. That's because there was a 4% chance that all the structure would delaminate and all the light would be coming through. So every person at all those kiosks that were set up knew not to play it again. I'm sure John is aware of this. And so you talk about a problem that you have to solve, and you say, find out a test to exacerbate it. We found that, because it takes like 10 minutes to do each movie, you have to expose it, you have to process it, you have to look at it, you have to then figure out what happened, make your notes. So anyway, we found by sticking the cassettes in an oven, you could make every single one of them fail. So instead of having to do 100 just to find 4, you could do 4 and find them all, and then you could make changes to the reagent or make changes to the film and see if you impacted it right away, so you can get to a solution a lot quicker. That's about it. It's anyway, it's an accelerated test.
Yeah.
Any questions for our colleagues? Yes.
Hypoxanthine, was that a reactant or a byproduct or?
No, it was something we added in the reagent. It's a silver solvent in the strainer, so it was intentionally added to help develop the film. And over time, it was not very soluble, especially at those lower pHs, and so ultimately it crashed out and oswald ripened and grew larger crystals.
So it wasn't consumed? Or
No, right. So that's the other point, right? We, I thank you. We actually had pretty large, like, molar excesses of the compounds, because if you got to make sure that you get everything done. You got it, right? You got to have 2 or 3 coats of paint on the wall, right? Exactly. So yeah, they were fairly. That's also why I was talking about that parking layer. They were fairly large excesses of almost everything. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
This is a totally non-technical question we're discussing, but I just uncorked a photograph album of all Polaroid pictures taken in 1964, which have faded.
Black and whites?
I'm sorry.
Black and whites or color? Black and whites.
Yes.
That's false.
Started in '68. Were they coatless or print coatable?
Yeah.
Do you know if they were ones that you had to print coat?
Oh, yes.
Okay, well, if they weren't properly print coated, they don't last very long. And if they are properly print coated, they're still good to this day. The problem is the print coating didn't necessarily do the whole pack adequately.
I have some print-coated images that are still fine, but my brother worked on print-coated, with print-coated image, maybe with two of those little, with one of those glue sticks, and then maybe do at most two images and then grab another one and do it. So sometimes they might dry out over time, and people get them on.
So the problem came down ultimately to the fact that when the user or the photographer person taking the photographs
Right.
got involved in the process,
Yes.
that's when they could lose it.
That's when they could lose it if they didn't print code it properly. So, and that stuff was messy, and that's kind of why they went to work on coming out with code was like, with 71, I believe.
Edmund Land,
You can stop from getting any worse by doing it now. I don't think anybody has a print code material. That also has a compound in it,
But it was a fairly simple.
yeah, some type of wall, and you could probably spray.
John
try
tried
spray it.
McCann's got the
My brother's got one too, but,
Probably look it up.
anyway. Yeah. There's also a way possible to go. I'm not sure.
so Edwin Land cooked up the idea in December of '43 for instant photography. He said it took him about 3 hours. It then took another 25 years to realize that vision of what he called absolute instant photography, which was this SX70 film and camera system, which did not require any user intervention at all.
Great information about it upstairs.
Yes, so, but that early period is, you know, that awkward, you didn't know that you were in the first adopter community of a new technology, and learning how to make it work is one of the great challenges of the technology. But Ted, I know you wanted to make an important announcement here too. Quit.
Let's see, a very famous 20 by 24, pardon me? Artist, yes, artist, a Cambridge artist at that. Elsa Dorfman is having her images shown at the MFA beginning today. Her family is also trying to raise $100,000 for the MFA to build a room that's let's see, temperature controlled, humidity controlled, so that the images will not fade, crack, peel, all the things that great photography does. So they are also looking for contributions. I will leave a few documents here. It explains how you can contribute and what time the exhibit is and so forth. Thank you.
It is sure to be a great exhibition, and I hope that you'll get a chance to see it. But another question there.
Yes, Ted, that 4x5 film that you were showing that you're trying to recreate,
Yes.
is that a positive, negative film? I used to work for Rory Morris in the black and white lab. And we were working on a positive, negative film that Ansel Adams tested for us.
No, it's not positive, negative, it's
Strictly the
field
field
guard,
guard.
color,
Right.
and it's the same negative structure and sheet structure and reagent that we use in our,
And the regular black and white.
correct.